Thanks. So while Julie's sharing her screen, so this session is titled Patreon, Subsonic and All That Jazz, presented by staff at the University of Melbourne. So Ashley Sutherland, Julie Cohen and Nathan Parry. So Ashley, Arts Faculty Librarian at the University of Melbourne and Acting Fine Arts and Music Librarian. I'll keep this short for the introductions. And Julie is a liaison librarian at the Fine Arts Music team, and Nathan works at the South Bank Library supporting arts, fine arts and music. All are wonderful musicians, and we've got some sound going there. So this abstract, it's just, this is their report on how they've worked on addressing the challenges of tertiary sector clients that tertiary sector clients face when accessing musical materials in today's environment. So without further ado, Julie, Ashley and Nathan, welcome.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm going to start us off. And before we start our presentation, Julie, Nathan and I would like to acknowledge the retirement of our long-standing faculty librarian, Georgina Binns, who we all know very well. Georgina led the Fine Arts and Music Library in its various incarnations, from the Victorian College of the Arts Library to the merger with the University of Melbourne. We'd like to acknowledge Georgina's work and her significant contribution to building library collections and leading the library team in developing innovative support for practice-based research and teaching at the Faculty of Fine Arts and Music. I'll now hand over to Nathan.
Yeah, I'll unmute. Thanks, Ashley. First of all, on behalf of everyone present, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're currently on. Some of us are on the lands of the Cohen peoples, which includes the Wurundjeri, Boonwurrung, Dja Dja Wurrung and Taungurung peoples, as well as the Yorta Yorta Nation. I happen to be on Wadda Wurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung land. A lot of us, of course, are on other lands. So wherever we are located, I would like to pay respects to all the elders past and present and emerging. These peoples comprise the oldest continuous culture in the world. An integral part of our work as music librarians is undoubtedly to support the International Music Council's statement that everyone should have access to musical involvement through participation, listening, creation and information. In the tertiary setting, this comes into play when supporting academics, students and researchers with the provision of easy access to music audio and scores. Due to considerations of sustainability and equity in access, and also because clients are in COVID-related isolation, online platforms have become the norm. So in interrogating the statement, we need to address and meet the patrons' expectations when it comes to accessing online audio and scores. In doing this, however, we find that in some instances there are barriers instigated by publishers and content providers that need to be circumvented. In this presentation, we'll report on our experiences in using and some problems encountered with a few streaming services, databases, and other online platforms when providing our clients with audio tracks and music scores. The music streaming service we've been using at UniMelb is Subsonic, a platform containing some good functionality. We use it predominantly to provide online audio tracks for music that comprise prescribed listening in particular subjects in fine arts and music. Subsonic can essentially be described as a do-it-yourself platform. Essentially, CDs from our collection are copied, converted to MP3 files, and then uploaded to Subsonic. Playlists can be created, and as you can see, they usually cover either a whole subject or individual weeks or sections of a subject. Of course, Subsonic can be used for dipping into any music that happens to be uploaded onto it. There's a search function on the top right, and so students and staff can utilise Subsonic as a music streaming service aside from its prescribed listening role. One big advantage of Subsonic is that we are effectively in control and not at the mercy of decisions or changes that might be made by any publisher or provider of commercial material. It allows for specific tracks to be uploaded onto it. So if an academic wants students to listen to a specific recording, We should be able to facilitate that. A commercial platform, in contrast, will not necessarily have the desired recording. Another plus is that it provides equity of access. All users will have the same experience and access to the same material. This is not something that commercial services such as Spotify provide, where typically the way the system functions and the material it avails to the user is based on the user's past behaviour. But Subsonic is not without its problems. Around early next year, the authentication method used by Subsonic will not be supported by the university. Consequently, since at least the beginning of this year, we have been sorting out a strategy that ensures the online streaming service is maintained. Naturally, this involves testing out a few options and liaising with and updating academics. Fortunately, it's easy to export the playlists from Subsonic, store in an archive, and import into whatever platform we end up using. What we have been recently considering is placing the music tracks straight onto the UniMelb's learning management system. Students will be able to directly access the audio material in conjunction with the other material for their subject. But what about the commercial online streaming services that are out there? They have heaps of music on them, and the UniMelb library has subscription access to a few of them, including Alexander Street Press and Naxos. And this means that students and staff don't have to pay. However, there are issues with the use of these commercial platforms. As I mentioned earlier, we are at the mercy of the publishers. Music works, for example, that are there now may not be there at some point in the future, and who can say for how long any of these platforms will last? So there is an issue of permanency. Commercial platforms are set up for recreational listening rather than the context of higher education, and therefore do not have any kind of tailoring for users. For example, as I mentioned earlier, users who need access to particular pieces or recordings. In employing a streaming service that the university is effectively 100% managing, such as Subsonic or the learning management system, most of these problems should be solved. Okay, I'll hand over to Julie now.
Okay, sorry, Ashley here. So providing access to online resources for students has been a key element of library services for some time, so it's not a new thing. But we're now being asked for access to a range of online platforms and apps that fall outside the traditional suite of resources. These reflect changes in teaching practice and in the types of resources that students are using in their own practice. These are things like Patreon and other platforms that are sort of similar to that. They generally offer these types of resources to subscribers, and they can include things like live streams from particular musicians, online masterclasses, videos discussing technique, etc. Some of them have composition workshops and services where you can get someone to give you opinions on your compositions, interviews, online lessons, all sorts of things. So I've got a couple of recent examples of the types of platforms we've been asked to facilitate access to just this year. And they're all highly relevant to student learning. They provide tools and resources that will benefit students in their own practice. And some of them, like Patreon, are models that are ones that students may consider to use when they're going to go on to adopt and promote their own practice after they leave uni. So the first one is Patreon. Our head of improvisation approached me earlier in the year and said, can we get access to a couple of these Patreon pages for some prominent jazz musicians? And I responded with, nobody's asked me that question before, but let's find out. She wanted students to have access to specific sort of transcriptions and some of that sort of subscriber-only content of live streams and discussions of performance, etc. So we did some inquiries, but unfortunately Patreon is just not set up for institutions at all and are not interested really in talking to institutions about that. It's very much a sort of individual subscriber only type model. So not to be phased, she came back and said, okay, well, if we can't do Patreon, what about this thing called Jazz Composers Present? And this is a very similar type of platform, similar sorts of things in terms of content. But this time around, when we spoke to the staff there, They were actually really, really excited to hear from us. And we're sort of at the moment trying to work out some technical things in the background to get access up and running for students. One of the things that we had to do, though, is the vendors had to actually go and contact Open Athens, which is the authentication system that we use, to make sure all of their tech side was compatible and that it was all going to work nicely together. So they're having a bit of an experiment with us, as we will be their first institutional subscriber. We've had ongoing issues with platforms like Play with a Pro, which is a series of online masterclasses and lessons. The academics are quite attached to that one, but access requires individual logins, and these things tend to break every time. And we renew our sub and we need to reset them at those times, which is super annoying for everybody. And it's an example of a site that's just not set up for institutional memberships. Again, these are things that are sort of done by practitioners and just not set up in the same sort of model, obviously, to the sort of vendors that we're used to dealing with. Another similar sort of area is providing access to accompaniment tracks for singers. And there's a lot of really great stuff around there, and these again reflect the differences in the way that people learn. I'm actually a huge fan of accompanist now that I'm reinventing myself as a soprano. This is the way that I've been sort of getting through and practicing with accompaniment tracks. And these things are all, again, highly relevant to students. They facilitate individual learning and rehearsal and are especially useful in the COVID environment. And this is one where we're still sort of working on. There are a couple of these platforms that do offer institutional access, so that's, you know, a better situation. But again, they tend to be smaller companies that are, you know, set up for different purposes. So you're sort of having to always retrospectively apply solutions. So basically, to summarize the issues, you know, there's a big difference in these sort of smaller commercial providers. They're often sort of DIY things with really great content, but just not designed for institutions. And this can be a bit of a problem in terms of, you know, obviously somebody sees it and thinks this would be brilliant for my student. Why can't we do it? And it's not a nice message when you have to go back with, you know, a whole lot of very boring technical reasons, especially to do with authentication, you know, and the way that their memberships are set up. So yeah, compatibility with our authentication system is a big barrier. One of the other things as well is the numbers of students too, because a lot of these have a sort of sliding scale of membership options depending on how many people. So there's a big difference in, say, if we can provide access to the 150 or so jazz and improv students that we've got compared to, you know, the tens of thousands of students at the entire university. Makes a big difference. There are some risks of not being able to provide access to this sort of thing because students can obviously, you know, explore their own options, go elsewhere. Faculty might actually see if they can manage some of the access to this sort of stuff. And so the danger there is that, you know, people aren't coming to the library for these types of things. And we would hate to be in a position where we're not seen as being as relevant to students. So it's a thing that we want to keep our eyes on and keep working through and see if, you know, what we can do to provide access to these newer types of online platforms.
Okay, I'll take over here. Digital music scores are nothing new, as we all know, and the COVID-19 situation has certainly highlighted a need for remote access to resources for teaching and learning, and this may have ongoing implications for our collections. We know that our faculty is already scanning scores and sending PDFs to students, but this does carry some concern about copyright as well as workload implications. Ensuring all students can access and use these scores and print them if necessary is also a consideration. As you no doubt know, there are many online options for public domain scores, for example, IMSLP. These are great for mainstream works that are out of copyright, but getting access to a full set of parts can be challenging, and finding a particular edition can also be really tricky. Databases such as the Classical Music Library can also provide quick access to more mainstream works, and they also allow academics to directly link scores to our Readings Online service as well. It does get more challenging with more contemporary works or jazz compositions, especially when copyright is still attached. Subscriptions to services like Babel Scores or the Australian Jazz Real Book help to fill some of these gaps. But as Ashley has mentioned, there are sometimes subscription issues to work through, and they can sometimes go offline too. Using these aggregated databases means we're also limited by what is included in them. Making a one-time purchase of print resources has always been a mainstay of our service to the faculty, but relying on collections within these databases means we have little to no input into what's made available or whether it will remain available into the future. More recently, we've been exploring purpose-built apps, for instance, Encoder. As already discussed, these can be challenging due to the commercial nature of their subscriptions, but they do offer some more interactive features that facilitate active learning rather than just sending out a PDF. So they are attractive to the faculty. As Nathan mentioned earlier, I skipped a slide. As Nathan mentioned earlier, some of these concerns are addressed by finding local solutions. So scores can be scanned and uploaded to our digital repository. Links to specific works can be embedded in our Readings Online service, and it offers students direct access to what they need. These are sometimes labour intensive, but they do allow us to share specific resources at the request of the academic. So our mission to ensure our communities have access to musical involvement through participation, listening, creation and information has long been the driving force behind our collections and services. In a tertiary environment, this is overlaid with a need to provide equal access to resources for learning and teaching. And for music, this also means listening and performing and rehearsing as well. Many of the challenges we've highlighted today have been around for a long time, but there's no denying that the need for faculty to teach remotely has changed the landscape of what we can deliver, possibly forever. In the library, we need to work with our key stakeholders to ensure access to what they need, while also adhering to the copyright and consider the ethical implications of making resources available online. We can offer many things, but they are locked behind a university login, and it's not always easy or convenient for the students and staff to make the most of them. The abundance of commercial services has made things easier in some ways, but it's not always serving the needs of the institution. We are reliant on what they decide to include, or we can't get access at all. The business model is different, the stability of the content is not always reliable. And algorithm-based recommendations have an impact on discoverability of content and equitable access to the students as well. So what solutions can we offer? Much of this is actually happening in real time and in response to requests from academics. It's not limited to music resources for us either. We've got similar concerns with music theatre, film and television, theatre practice all around the faculty. Our current workarounds include a few bespoke in-house solutions that address our needs and ensure access for students, but they're not necessarily scalable or an efficient use of our time and resources. This is all a work in progress, but one we're committed to ensure that the important work of listening, creating and participating can continue in our institution, wherever that work is happening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lots of questions actually in the background at the chatter there, especially about copyright and things as well, which are being answered as well on the sessions. But I guess for everyone's benefit, it's probably hard to distill. Essentially, there is a tertiary music license for some of the people asking about copyright, which does allow for various things, but behind logins. So, and that's the challenge that we can see that you're meeting and addressing there. Any questions from anyone that would like to ask Julie or Ashley or Nathan at the moment?
We probably need a separate forum just to talk about
yeah.
Subsonic and all the variations that are out there.
There are some really interesting looking things. So that could, it could be actually a session on its own.
And
Definitely.
Subsonic Look has been working really well for quite a number of years, but it was only ever sort of like an intermediate step because it was a way of providing digital access to the physical sound recording collection. And we'd probably still keep using it until something better came along, except for the fact that our lovely two-factor authentication system for the whole university is now going to stop it from working at all. So that's what's forcing the issue there. But yeah, we use Canvas as our learning management system, and basically what we're doing is with the existing playlists that are in Subsonic, which are DIY digitized by us from our physical collections, we are able to then upload those as files, or sometimes zip files. Sometimes we do individuals, but at the moment we're sort of trying to do as many zip files as possible into the LMS, and then students can access those and they just play through whatever their local media player is on their laptop. And that's sort of like a you know, a sort of workaround. What we would like to do eventually is to upload all of those tracks into our digital repository and then link properly through the Readings Online system. But we're going to use Canvas to sort of track, all of the data we need for copyright reporting and that sort of thing in the meantime. But we're going to need to get a grant basically to do all of the metadata, because the metadata that's in Subsonic is a bit patchy because of just the way that it had to be. So in order to put it into the repository, we're going to have to actually look at getting a grant so that we can actually employ someone to fix up all the metadata. And then once it's in the repository, it's really simple. So that's a matter of just linking out to things. But yeah, lots of little challenges here and there.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really conscious of the time, so we'll have to stop it there. But that's really sparked a lot of conversation in the chat there. So one for everyone to just make sure you will save and share with everyone at the end. So we'll have a go. Thank you so much for that.